quest for a partner, a companion, a spouse. It is a tale as old as time. For those navigating the world as unwed individuals, advice has never been in short supply, spanning centuries and cultures. Some of this guidance, viewed through a modern lens, can appear rather peculiar. Imagine being told that the path to matrimony might involve strategically dropping a handkerchief, or that a list published in 1958 offered 129 distinct methods for a woman to secure a husband, including suggestions like having your car break down at strategic locations. Or picture ancient Romans in 2 ad receiving detailed instructions on where to find and how to approach potential lovers, from public porticos to the sands of the arena. These are just glimpses into the vast and often bewildering world of historical relationship advice. Prepare to journey back and explore some of the most striking counsel ever offered to the unwed. Number 6. The 1958 magazine, spread with 129 ways to snare him. In the May 1958 issue of McCall's magazine, a popular American publication for women, an article appeared that would become a fascinating snapshot of its time, titled 129 Ways to Get a Husband. This feature was not a subtle piece. It was a direct, almost tactical guide for single women aiming for marriage in the post-World War II era of the United States of America. The article itself was a brainstormed list, presented with an air of enthusiastic problem-solving, compiled from the ideas of 16 people, including male author George Abbott and female author. The advice ranged significantly in its nature and intensity. Some suggestions were relatively innocuous, such as, be friendly to everybody. They may have an eligible brother or son. Others encouraged a more proactive, almost strategic approach to daily life. For instance, women were advised to get a job in a medical, dental, or law school, or become a nurse or an airline stewardess. They have a great turnover. The implication here was clear: place yourself in environments with a high concentration of men, particularly those in respected or potentially affluent professions. The list delved into specifics about location and hobbies. Unwed women were told to look in the census reports for places with the most single men, an almost data-driven approach to finding a partner. Another suggestion was to read the obituaries to find eligible widowers. This particular piece of advice often draws attention for its somewhat morbid pragmatism. Other location-based tips included: stand in a corner and cry softly, chances are good someone will come over to find out what's wrong, and carry a hat box. A different tip suggested one should accidentally have your car break down at strategic locations. Personal presentation and behavior were, unsurprisingly, key themes. Practice your laugh. It should be musical, but not loud, one point instructed. Another advised, make your voice sound low and inviting over the phone. There was also the counsel to learn to paint. Set up an easel outside an engineering school. This combines a hobby with strategic placement. Women were encouraged to wear a Band-Aid. People always ask what happened. This was presented as an icebreaker, a way to initiate conversation. Some of the 129 ways involved a degree of deception, or at least strategic omission. For example, if you're at a resort, let the bellhop carry your bags. According to an old saying, he'll find you a husband before the week is out. Or, ask your friends for a list of all the men they know who are not married. Call each one and tell him you're conducting a survey. The list even suggested, be nice to ugly men. They're grateful. And tell him he's handsome. Context of 1958 America is crucial for understanding why such an article was not only published, but likely taken quite seriously by many of its readers. Post-war period saw a strong emphasis on family formation and a return to traditional gender roles. Marriage was often presented as the primary, if not sole, path to fulfillment and security for women. The average age for women to marry in the 1950s was around 20 years old. There was immense social pressure to marry young. Women who remained single past a certain age often faced societal scrutiny and were sometimes pitied or considered to have failed in a key aspect of womanhood. McCall's magazine itself had a circulation of millions, primarily targeting homemakers and women aspiring to that role. Its content typically focused on fashion, beauty, cooking, and family life. The inclusion of such a direct and somewhat desperate-sounding guide to husband hunting reflects the anxieties of the time. The post-war baby boom was in full swing, and the ideal of the nuclear family, a working husband, a stay-at-home wife and children, was heavily promoted in media and popular culture. For many women, economic survival and social standing were intrinsically linked to marriage. Professional opportunities for women were limited compared to men, and wages were often significantly lower. The list itself, with its sheer number of suggestions, implied that finding a husband was a project requiring considerable effort, strategy, and perhaps even a touch of cunning. It framed the pursuit of marriage almost like a campaign, with specific tactics to be deployed in various situations. While some of the advice centered on self-improvement, like take a speech course or learn to play a musical instrument, many others focused on methods of attracting male attention or engineering encounters. The sheer volume and specificity of the list could be seen as both empowering by offering tangible actions and overwhelming by suggesting the immense effort required. It is a document that speaks volumes about the perceived stakes for unwed women in that particular historical moment, where singleness for a woman was often viewed not as a choice, but as an unfortunate circumstance to be remedied with diligence and a very long list of tricks. The advice to buy a convertible, men like to ride in them, or learn to ski even if you don't like it, further coaxed the idea of molding oneself to perceived male preferences. The final piece of advice on the list was, don't give up. You have a 1 in 86 chance of getting married this year. This statistical note, whether accurate or not, aimed to offer a final, somewhat pragmatic note of encouragement in what was presented as a challenging endeavor. The Victorian lady's delicate art of almost not existing. The Victorian era, roughly spanning from 1837 to 1901 during the reign of Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom, was a period of immense industrial, cultural, political, scientific, and military change. It was also an era with highly defined gender roles and strict codes of conduct, particularly for women of the middle and upper classes. For an unwed woman, her presentation and behavior were under constant scrutiny, as they were believed to directly impact her marriage prospects, which were often her primary path to social and economic security. Within this context, advice on cultivating an image of delicacy, modesty, and even a certain degree of physical frailty became commonplace. Numerous advice manuals, magazine articles, and societal expectations reinforced the idea that the ideal woman was gentle, submissive, and not overly robust in health or opinion. This ideal was sometimes referred to as the angel in the house, a term popularized by Coventry Patmore's poem of the same name. This angel was expected to be pious, pure, and devoted to her husband and family, but also to possess a certain ethereal, almost fragile quality. Physical robustness or overt intellectualism could be seen as masculine traits and therefore undesirable in a potential wife. Advice often centered on cultivating a pale complexion, which signified a life sheltered from manual labor, and the sun thus indicating higher social status. Remedies and routines to achieve this paleness were abundant. Beyond skin tone, a general air of fragility was encouraged. Fainting, or the appearance of being prone to fainting, was in some circles almost a fashionable ailment. Could be interpreted as a sign of a woman's sensitive nature and delicate constitution. Etiquette books and novels of the period frequently depicted women swooning in response to emotional distress, shocking news, or even tight corsetry. While genuine faints certainly occurred, the romanticization of this vulnerability meant that some women might have felt pressure to exhibit such frailty. Corsetry itself played a significant role in shaping the female silhouette, and by extension, the perception of delicacy. Tight lacing, the practice of cinching corsets extremely tightly to achieve a tiny waist, was common. This practice could restrict breathing, displace internal organs, and indeed lead to fainting or other health problems. Yet the wasp waist was a beauty standard, and enduring the discomfort of a tight corset was part of achieving the fashionable, delicate look. Medical professionals of the time often debated the health impacts of corsetry, with some condemning it and others seeing it as necessary for female posture and support. Advice given to unwed women would implicitly or explicitly guide them towards these ideals. For instance, conduct books would emphasize demure behavior, soft speech, and a general reticence. A young woman was not to be too forward, too loud, or too opinionated. Her education, if she received one beyond basic literacy and household management, was often geared towards accomplishments that would make her an agreeable companion. Skills like playing the piano, singing, drawing, or speaking French. These were parlor accomplishments, designed to be cogatized in a domestic setting to attract a suitable husband. Dr. John Gregory's A Father's Legacy to His Daughters, published in 1774, but influential well into the 19th century, cautioned young women against displaying their wit or learning too openly. He wrote, "If you have any learning, keep it a profound secret, especially from the men who generally look with a jealous and malignant eye on a woman of great parts and a cultivated understanding." This sentiment persisted. While the Victorian era saw advancements in women's education, the fear of being perceived as a blue-stocking, an overly intellectual or scholarly woman, and therefore unmarriageable, was very real for many. Physical activity for women was often restricted or carefully managed. Vigorous sports were generally considered unladylike. Gentle walks, croquet, or perhaps archery were acceptable, but anything that might lead to perspiration, unseemly exertion, or a ruddy complexion was often frowned upon. The image was one of graceful, almost effortless movement. The social interactions between unwed men and women were also highly regimented. Chaperones were essential for young unmarried women of respectable families, whenever they were in the company of men to whom they were not related. This was to protect their reputation, which was paramount. A whisper of scandal could ruin a young woman's marriage prospects entirely. The advice, therefore, was to be impeccably behaved, to avoid any situation that could be misinterpreted, and to always appear modest and virtuous. In terms of attracting a husband, this cultivated delicacy was thought to appeal to the male protective instinct. A man, it was believed, would be drawn to a woman who appeared to need his strength and guidance. An overly independent or robust woman might be seen as intimidating or as not needing a husband in the same way. This is not to say all Victorian women were wilting flowers. Many were strong, capable individuals who managed households, raised families, and, in some cases, pursued professions or engaged in social reform. However, the prevailing ideal presented in much of the advice literature for unwed women leaned heavily towards this notion of delicate femininity. Pressure to conform to this ideal, involving everything from physical appearance to emotional expression and intellectual display, was a significant aspect of life for an unwed Victorian woman seeking marriage. Even the popular novels of the time often reinforced these tropes, with heroines praised for their sensitivity and gentle natures, further embedding these ideals into the cultural consciousness. Number 4. Ovid's ancient Roman guide to seduction from 2 ad. Publius Ovidius Naso, known as Ovid, was a Roman poet who lived during the reign of Augustus. Around the year 2 AD, he penned a work that has captivated and scandalized readers for 2 millennia, Ars Amatoria, or The Art of Love. This didactic elegiac poem is in essence a manual on the arts of seduction and maintaining a relationship, offering surprisingly detailed and often morally ambiguous advice to both men. And in its 3rd book, Women of Ancient Rome, while not exclusively for the unwed seeking marriage, its core focus is on initiating romantic and physical relationships, making it a significant piece of historical advice for those looking for partners. First 2 books of Ars Amatoria are addressed to men. Ovid begins by instructing his male readers on where to find potential female companions. His suggestions are a tour of public life in Rome. He points to the law courts, the temples, and especially the public porticos, like the Portico of Livia or the Portico of Octavia, which were covered walkways where people socialized. The theater was another prime location. Ovid notes that many a romance began amidst the spectacle of the stage. He even suggests the Roman Forum and the Circus Maximus, where chariot races were held as fertile grounds for meeting women. At the bend where the chariots turn, that's where you'll catch her, he might have quipped, highlighting the opportunities for casual contact in crowded public venues. He specifically mentions the gladiatorial games, noting that the close seating and shared excitement could foster intimacy. Often, a woman unknown is wounded next to a spectator, he wrote, suggesting that shared dramatic experiences could lead to connection. Once a potential partner was spotted, Ovid provided tips on how to approach her. He emphasized the importance of confidence and persistence. He advised men to be well-groomed. Clean teeth, neat hair, and well-fitting clean togas were essential. He suggested initiating conversation with compliments, but not overly elaborate ones. Offering small services like adjusting her cushion at the games or fanning her if she felt warm were recommended as ways to break the ice. He also advised men to learn about things that might interest women, such as different types of wool or popular games, to have ready topics for conversation. Ovid was not shy about advocating for a degree of dissimulation. He advised men to feign passion, even if they did not initially feel it, suggesting that belief comes from habit. He recommended writing love letters, using persuasive language, and making promises even if one was not entirely sure of fulfilling them. He also discussed the strategic use of gifts, though he cautioned against overly expensive ones that might seem like bribery, suggesting instead thoughtful small tokens. Wine, he noted, could be an ally loosening tongues and inhibitions, but he warned against drinking to excess oneself. Pretend to be drunk, he even suggested, and if she says anything foolish as a result of the wine, attribute it to Bacchus. The 2nd book shifts to how to keep a lover once she has been won. Here, Ovid stressed the importance of pleasing the woman, both emotionally and physically. He advised men to be attentive, to remember important dates, and to continue with compliments and small kindnesses. He emphasized tolerance of a beloved's moods, and even her faults. Unusually for his time, he also included frank advice on sexual pleasure, encouraging men to ensure their partners also experienced enjoyment, stating, "Let the woman feel the coils of Venus through her marrow." This focus on mutual pleasure was quite progressive for ancient Rome. The 3rd book of Ars Amatoria is addressed to women, offering them reciprocal advice on how to attract and keep men. This section demonstrates that Ovid saw the game of love as one played by 2 sides. He advised women on personal grooming, hairstyles, suggesting different styles, suited different face shapes, subtle use of cosmetics, art conceals art, and elegant dress. He recommended that women learn to sing, dance, and play musical instruments. He also encouraged them to read poetry, including his own, to appear cultured. Ovid cautioned women against overt displays of jealousy or anger, advising them to maintain a pleasant and agreeable demeanor. He suggested they should be seen in public places, just as he advised men to look for them there. He even gave tips on how to write alluring letters and how to manage secret affairs if necessary. Like men, women were advised to sometimes feign emotions. For instance, to appear more interested or more coy than they actually felt, depending on what the situation required. He also touched on the importance of being a stimulating companion, able to converse on various topics. Laugh with charm, he advised. Let a dimple appear on either side of your mouth. He also told women to learn games like dice and board games, as these were social activities shared with men. The ars amatoria was wildly popular, but also controversial. Ovid's frank and often immoral tone, particularly his seeming endorsement of adultery and deception, did not sit well with the Emperor Augustus, who was attempting to legislate a return to traditional Roman morality, including laws like the Lex Julia de Adulterius, Coercentis, Julian law on coercing adultery, around 18 BC. Ovid's poem was seen as undermining these efforts. In 8, several years after the publication of Ars Amatoria, Augustus exiled Ovid to Tomis, a remote town on the Black Sea. While the official reasons for his exile are debated by historians, Ovid himself cited Carmen et Error, a poem and a mistake. The poem is widely believed to be the Ars Amatoria. Despite the imperial disapproval, Ovid's work endured, influencing Western literature and ideas about love and seduction for centuries. It provides an unparalleled window into the social dynamics and romantic pursuits of the Roman elite during the early Roman Empire. For the unwed of ancient Rome, or at least those literate and urbane enough to access such a work, Ovid offered a sophisticated, worldly, and strikingly modern-sounding, if ethically dubious, guide to navigating the complexities of finding and keeping a lover. His advice, rooted in observation of human behavior, focused on charm, strategy, and the importance of mutual pleasure, making it a unique document in the history of relationship counsel. Number 3. The peril of an educated woman seeking a husband in the 18th and 19th centuries. During the 18th and 19th centuries in Europe and America, peculiar anxiety surrounded the notion of the educated woman, particularly when it came to her prospects for marriage. While the Enlightenment had spurred new ideas about reason and individual rights, these were not always extended equally to women, especially in the realm of higher learning and public intellectual life. For an unwed woman, displaying too much intelligence or academic learning could be perceived not as an asset, but as a significant detriment to attracting a husband. The term bluestocking emerged in the mid-18th century to describe women who participated in literary and intellectual circles, and while initially it could be a neutral or even positive term, it gradually acquired negative connotations, suggesting a woman who is overly studious, unfeminine, and perhaps neglectful of domestic duties, all traits deemed undesirably studious. Numerous advice writers and social commentators of the period cautioned women against appearing too smart. Dr. John Gregory, in his widely read 1774 book, A Father's Legacy to His Daughters, famously advised, "Be cautious in displaying your good sense. It will be thought you assume a superiority over the rest of the company, but if you happen to have any learning, keep it a profound secret, especially from the men, who generally look with a jealous." This sentiment echoed through much of the subsequent century. The underlying message was that men were supposedly intimidated or repelled by intellectual women, preferring partners who were more docile, less challenging, and whose intelligence would not outshine their own. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, an influential Enlightenment philosopher, also promoted the idea of distinct and complementary gender roles in his 1762 treatise, Emile, or On Education. While he advocated for education, his vision for female education was primarily geared towards making women pleasing companions to men and capable mothers. He wrote, "A woman's education must be planned in relation to man, to be pleasing in his sight, to win his respect and love, to train him in childhood, to tend him in manhood, to counsel and console, to make his life pleasant and happy. These are the duties of woman for all time." This perspective limited the scope of acceptable female learning to that which served domestic and marital ends. Even when women did receive education, it was often qualitatively different from that of men, focusing on accomplishments like music, drawing, needlework, and modern languages rather than classical studies, mathematics, or sciences, which were considered the domain of male intellect. These accomplishments were intended to enhance a woman's charm and agreeableness, making her a more desirable match. Displaying deep knowledge in traditionally male subjects could lead to social ostracism or ridicule. The fear was that an educated woman would be argumentative, independent-minded, and less willing to submit to a husband's authority, which was the expected norm within marriage. She might question traditional roles, or even worse, find intellectual pursuits more engaging than household management or child-rearing. Satirical portrayals of blue stockings in literature and cartoons of the era often depicted them as unattractive, pedantic, and neglectful of their appearance and domestic responsibilities. Hannah More, herself an educated woman and writer associated with the original Blue Stocking Society, ironically cautioned in her works, such as Strictures on the Modern System of Female Education, 1799, against women pursuing learning for ostentatious display. While she advocated for better female education, she emphasized that it should be for moral improvement and to make women better companions, and mothers, not to compete with men. She wrote, "Girls should be led to distrust their own judgment. They should learn not to murmur at expostulation. They should be accustomed to expect and to endure opposition." This societal pressure meant that intelligent and educated unwed women often faced a difficult choice: either conceal their intellect to improve their marriage prospects, or risk being perceived as unmarriageable. Many letters and diaries from the period reveal women's frustrations with these limitations. Jane Austen, whose novels subtly critique these societal constraints, often portrayed heroines who were intelligent and observant, though they typically navigated the social landscape with careful discretion. By the mid to late 19th century, opportunities for women's higher education began to expand with the founding of women's colleges and the admission of women to some universities. However, the societal bias against overtly intellectual women in the context of marriage persists. A woman graduating from college might still find herself advised to downplay her achievements when interacting with potential suitors. Prevailing wisdom suggested that most men preferred a wife who was sensible and pleasant company, but not one who would constantly challenge them intellectually or make them feel inferior. The threat of female intelligence was tied to the era's understanding of gender and power within marriage. Marriage was not just a romantic union, but also an economic and social institution where the husband was typically considered the head of the household. A woman whose intellect was perceived as superior might disrupt this established hierarchy. Therefore, advice for unwed women often focused on cultivating qualities like gentleness, modesty, and an agreeable nature, while explicitly or implicitly warning against the open display of profound learning or critical thinking. This created a challenging environment for bright, ambitious young women who also desired marriage and family, forcing them to navigate a fine line between their intellectual capabilities and societal expectation. The idea that a woman had to choose between her mind and her marital happiness was a recurring theme, reflecting the deep-seated patriarchal assumptions of the time. Number 2. The business of marriage in Missibile and Renaissance conduct. Books. In the Missibile and Renaissance periods, roughly spanning from the 5th to the 17th century in Europe, Marriage for the upper and merchant classes was often far removed from modern notions of romantic love. It was frequently a strategic alliance, an economic transaction, and a means of consolidating power, wealth, and social standing. For an unwed woman, and indeed her family, securing a suitable marriage was a matter of utmost importance, and a genre of literature known as conduct books provided explicit, pragmatic advice on how to achieve this. These texts laid bare the often transactional nature of matrimony, offering guidance on everything from dowries to demeanor. Conduct books, written by figures ranging from clerics and scholars to merchants and noblewomen, aim to instruct young people, particularly women, on proper behavior, piety, and the skills necessary for their prescribed social roles. When it came to marriage, the advice was clear. A woman's virtue, obedience, and domestic competence were key assets. But so too was her dowry. The dowry was a sum of money, goods, or land that the bride's family provided to the groom or his family upon marriage. It was a critical component of marriage negotiations. A substantial dowry could elevate a woman's status and attract more desirable suitors. Conversely, a small dowry could significantly limit her options. Conduct books often implicitly or explicitly acknowledged this financial reality. For example, Christine de Pizan, a remarkable late medieval author, wrote The Book of the City of Ladies, 1405, and The Treasure of the City of Ladies, also known as The Book of Three Virtues. While advocating for women's value and education, her advice for women of different social classes was also intensely practical regarding marriage. She advised princesses and noblewomen on how to be wise and prudent managers of their households and estates, skills that would make them valuable partners in dynastic alliances. For women of lower status, the emphasis was on diligence, chastity, and obedience. Pizan understood that a woman's reputation was inextricably linked to her marriageability and her family's honor. One such Italian conduct book, Libro di Costumi, Book of Customs, by Paolo da Certaldo, written in the late 14th century, offered frank advice to merchant families. He stated, "If you have daughters, get them married as soon as they are of age, and don't be too fussy about the dowry. It is better to give a little more and marry them well and to your liking than to save a little and get a bad bargain." This highlights the urgency and the investment involved. He also advised, "When you give your daughter in marriage, see that she is well-dressed and well-adorned according to her station, for this is the first honor you do her and yourself." Appearance and presentation were part of the package. The emphasis on female chastity was paramount. A woman's virginity before marriage was considered a non-negotiable asset. Any suspicion to the contrary could ruin her chances of making a good match and bring shame upon her entire family. Conduct books relentlessly stressed the importance of modesty in dress, speech, and behavior to safeguard this precious commodity. Young women were advised to avoid the company of unknown men, to lower their eyes in public, and to speak sparingly. Francesco Barbaro, in his 15th century Venetian treatise, De Reauxoria, on wifely duties, which was hugely influential, emphasized that a wife's primary virtues were obedience, silence, and fidelity. While addressed to married women, the qualities it praised were those cultivated in unwed girls to prepare them for marriage. Beyond virtue and dowry, domestic skills were also crucial. An unwed woman was expected to learn how to manage a household, supervise servants, if her class allowed, sew, spin, and perhaps manage basic accounts. These skills demonstrated her potential to be a capable and efficient wife, contributing to the smooth running and economic stability of her future husband's home. Leon Battista Alberti's I Libri della Famiglia, the Books of the Family, written in the 1430s, stressed the importance of a wife's role in household management advising that a man should choose a wife who is not only of good family and virtuous, but also healthy and capable of bearing children and running a home efficiently. The process of arranging a marriage was typically handled by the families, often with the help of marriage brokers. Prospective bride and groom might have little or no say in the matter, particularly in the higher echelons of society. Romantic love, if it developed, was generally hoped to come after the marriage, not before. Primary considerations were compatibility of social status, economic benefits, and the potential for producing heirs. Advice for unwed women, therefore, was geared towards making them the most attractive package possible within this system. This meant cultivating an impeccable reputation, demonstrating piety and obedience, being skilled in domestic arts, and, if possible, coming with a respectable dowry. The language used in some conduct literature can seem harsh to modern ears, sometimes discussing daughters almost as commodities, to be carefully managed and advantageously placed. For instance, there might be advice on how to present a daughter to potential suitors, how to negotiate the dowry effectively, and how to ensure her behavior reflected well on the family's honor and standing. Pressure on unwed women was immense. Failure to marry could mean a life of dependency on relatives or entry into a convent, which was one of the few socially acceptable alternatives for unmarried women of good families. Conduct books, therefore, were not just offering polite suggestions. They were providing what was considered essential guidance for navigating a system where a woman's entire future, social identity, and economic well-being hinged on making a successful marriage, defined largely in socio-economic rather than personal or emotional terms. The ridiculousness from a modern perspective lies in this overt transactionalism and the often severe limitations placed on a woman's agency and personal desires, all meticulously detailed as practical wisdom for survival and success in that societal structure. Number 1. The 17th century Puritan rules for courting that involved a bed, a board, and zero funny business. In colonial America, particularly in the Puritan communities of New England during the 17th and 18th centuries, courtship practices were a fascinating blend of strict moral oversight and surprising pragmatism. While Puritans are often stereotyped as being universally grim and repressive, their approach to marriage and courtship, while certainly bound by strong religious and social codes, also had unique customs designed to allow young unwed couples to get to know each other, one of the most peculiar and debated of which was known as bundling. Marriage was highly encouraged among Puritans. It was considered the natural state for adults and essential for social order and the procreation of children to build their godly community. Singleness beyond a certain age was unusual, and sometimes even viewed with suspicion. The process of courtship, therefore, was taken very seriously, but it also needed to be practical in a society where homes were often small, travel was difficult, and privacy was scarce. Before any formal courtship could begin, a young man typically had to gain the permission of the young woman's parents, particularly her father. This was a crucial step, demonstrating respect for family authority. Once permission was granted, the couple could begin keeping company. This involved spending time together, often in the young woman's home, under the watchful eyes of her family. Parlors, if the family had one, were common settings. However, in a society with long, cold winters and homes that were often poorly heated and crowded, finding private or comfortable spaces for couples to converse was a challenge. This is where the practice of bundling, or tarrying, is said to have emerged, primarily in New England and some parts of Wales and the Netherlands. Bundling involved in courting unwed couples spending the night together in the same bed, fully or partially clothed, and often with a physical barrier such as a bundling board or bolster placed between them. Purpose was to allow the couple to converse, stay warm, and develop their acquaintance in a setting that conserved firewood and candles without theoretically engaging in sexual activity. The historical evidence for bundling is varied, coming from diaries, letters, court records when things went awry, and travelers' accounts, some of which were critical or sensationalized. Reverend Samuel Peters, in his General History of Connecticut, 1781, provided a somewhat notorious and possibly exaggerated description of the custom, contributing to its later reputation. He described it as a way for couples to be social and save on heating costs. He noted that parents tolerated it, believing it to be an innocent practice. The rules surrounding bundling were, by all accounts, intended to be strict. The couple was expected to remain clothed, often with specific garments worn for the occasion. The bundling board, a long wooden plank, or sometimes a bundling sack or separate blankets, served as a symbolic and physical deterrent to inappropriate intimacy. The understanding was that the couple would talk, perhaps whisper sweet nothings, and get to know each other's characters and temperaments during these nocturnal conversations, all while preserving the young woman's chastity, which was highly valued. Despite these precautions, the practice was inherently risky and became increasingly controversial. Critics both within and outside Puritan communities argued that bundling provided too much temptation and inevitably led to premarital sexual activity and consequently premarital pregnancy. Indeed, church records from the period show a noticeable number of brides who were pregnant at the time of their marriage, although it is difficult to definitively link all such instances directly to bundling, as other forms of courtship also presented opportunities. Some historians suggest that pregnancy rates did rise in areas where bundling was common during certain periods. By the late 18th century and into the early 19th century, bundling faced growing condemnation from religious leaders and social reformers who viewed it as improper and conducive to sin. Ministers preached against it, and respectable families began to discourage it. The Great Awakening, a series of religious revivals in the American colonies in the 1730s and 1740s, led to increased moral scrutiny of social customs, and bundling came under fire as part of this. As living standards improved, homes became larger and better heated, and ideas about privacy and propriety evolved. The practical justifications for bundling diminished. The advice implicit in allowing bundling from a parental perspective was a pragmatic attempt to balance the need for young people to form attachments with the harsh realities of colonial life and the overriding importance of moral purity. For the unwed couple, it was a unique and, to modern sensibilities, very odd framework for developing intimacy, both emotional and perilously physical. It represented a community grappling with how to manage the powerful drive for human connection within a strict theological and social system. The advice to bundle, if it can be called that, was essentially, you may share a bed to talk and stay warm, but you must absolutely not touch or engage in any further intimacy, and we trust your piety and self-control to ensure this. The sheer audacity of the practice, placing two young, unwed individuals in such close proximity for extended periods with the expectation of complete chastity, is what makes it stand out. It highlights a very different understanding of courtship, privacy, and the management of youthful desires than what prevails today. While other courtship rules were strict, no unsupervised meetings and public adherence to curfews, the necessity of parental consent, bundling remains one of the most talked about and seemingly contradictory pieces of advice or tolerated custom. From this period, a testament to the Compsqua's societies have historically tried to channel the path from singleness to marriage.